The rain-slicked cobblestones of Montparnasse glisten under a waning street lamp, each stone catching the reflection of a passing taxi like a fleeting memory. You hear the soft clink of crystal glasses at Le Dôme, the low murmur of conversation swelling into laughter, and somewhere nearby a piano sighs out a lazy jazz riff that drifts through the night air. A small table near the corner gathers a cluster of expatriates, American writers, painters, dreamers, huddled together as if sharing a secret fire against the chill of post-war Paris. This is not a polished travel vlog shot from a drone, it is the living pulse of the lost generation, a phrase first whispered by Stein and later amplified by Ernest Hemingway. These restless souls abandoned the cramped, moral certainty of America after the Great War, seeking instead the liberating, bohemian avenues of 1920s Paris. Why did they flee? The cataclysm of the Great War shattered every familiar certainty. Young men who had marched off to fight under banners of progress and patriotism returned home bearing invisible scars, shell shock, disillusionment, a gnawing sense that the world they once knew had dissolved into ash. In its place grew an existential vacuum, a hollow feeling that life itself had lost any inherent meaning. That void becomes the invisible thread stitching together every story we will explore: Hemingway's razor-sharp prose, the iceberg theory, the tangled loves of Jake Barnes and Lady Brett Ashley, the fragile masculinity of Robert Cohn, the steady guidance of Gertrude Stein, and the bohemian lifestyle that tried, sometimes spectacularly, to fill the emptiness. Ernest Hemingway entered the scene from Oak Park, Illinois, in the year 1899. He cut his literary teeth on the Kansas City Star, learning early the power of short, declarative sentences that strike like a clean gunshot. He carried that journalistic discipline into his fiction, stripping away ornamentation until only the essential remained, leaving readers to feel the weight of what was left unsaid. This minimalist approach crystallized into what he called the iceberg theory: a story should reveal only its tip, while the massive bulk of meaning lies hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the reader to infer it. Imagine a bullfighter's cape fluttering in the arena, the bright colors, the swift motion, the drama you see, while underneath roils tension, fear, centuries of tradition, felt rather than spoken. Hemingway wielded this technique on the core of human experience: war, love, loss, the endless search for purpose. In A Farewell to Arms, the Italian front serves as a bleak backdrop for Frederick Henry's desperate attempt to reconcile duty with desire, each trench echoing with the hollow sound of artillery and unspoken longing. In For Whom the Bell Tolls, Robert Jordan fights a guerrilla war in Spain, wrestling with the haunting question of whether his sacrifice will ever matter beyond the momentary flash of gunfire. And perhaps most famously, The Sun Also Rises captures the post-war disillusionment of a generation that drinks, runs, and loves without ever finding lasting fulfillment, their nights a blur of cafés, bullfights, and restless wanderings along the Seine. Enter Jake Barnes, the novel's stoic narrator, a veteran of World War I whose thigh wound renders him impotent. His physical injury becomes a stark metaphor for the broader impotence of his generation, a generation unable to act decisively in a world where old values have crumbled to dust. Jake's love for Lady Brett Ashley burns fierce and tragic. He can adore her, feel jealousy, ache with longing, yet he cannot consummate that love. This unfulfilled desire fuels a quiet desperation that courses through every page. When Jake confesses, "I'm not sure why I'm so sad," the reader feels the weight of an entire era pressing down on a single man, each syllable a silent echo of collective grief. Lady Brett Ashley herself stands as a study in contradictions. She is beautiful, independent, unapologetically sexual, qualities that make her a muse for many of Hemingway's male characters. Yet she is also portrayed as a steer in a bullfight, constantly pursued by men who view her as a prize rather than a person. The metaphor of the bullring recurs throughout the novel: the matador, the crowd, the blood-stained sand, all symbols of performance, danger, fleeting glory. Brett rides the line between empowerment and objectification. She commands attention, yet remains unattainable, a living embodiment of the existential void that haunts the lost generation. Her tangled relationships with Jake, Mike Campbell, and others illustrate how love can become a battlefield where everyone is wounded, but no one truly heals. Robert Cohn, often dismissed as the con in fan discussions, adds another layer to this dynamic. A former boxing champion turned writer, Cohn possesses physical strength but emotional insecurity. He admires Brett from a distance, yearning for validation that forever eludes him. His Jewish background and outsider status amplify his sense of alienation, making him a target for both overt hostility and subtle mockery. Cohn's attempts to assert masculinity, through boxing matches, literary ambition, desperate flirtations, only highlight his inner fragility. He embodies the crisis of masculinity that plagued many of Hemingway's characters, the pressure to be tough, decisive, dominant, juxtaposed against a world that no longer rewards those traits. Now let's talk about the setting that makes all of this possible, the Parisian cafés of the left bank. Places like La Rotonde, Le Dôme, and Café de Flore were far more than simple eateries. They were vibrant incubators of ideas, living rooms for the restless, where figures such as Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Gertrude Stein, Ezra Pound, and Pablo Picasso gathered to exchange sharp jokes, heated arguments, and bold artistic manifestos over endless cups of coffee. These cafés served as the grand stage for the bohemian lifestyle, a volatile blend of artistic freedom, financial precarity, and a relentless drive for social experimentation. The bohemians of this era flatly rejected the conventional career path, choosing instead a life dedicated to art. Their days were consumed by writing, painting, and debating philosophy, often fueled by cheap wine. As night fell, they drifted into smoky clubs where the latest jazz standards filled the air. This lifestyle was more than a trend, it was a rebellion against the stifling, rigid norms of the United States and a desperate, aching attempt to fill the vacuum left by the devastation of the war. At the heart of this community stood Gertrude Stein, the formidable patroness of the arts. Her salon on Rue de Fleuris acted as a crucible where raw, unpolished talent met her sharp, uncompromising criticism. Stein herself pushed the boundaries of language with her experimental prose, such as Tender Buttons, which challenged traditional syntax and encouraged younger writers to break free from the chains of grammatical constraints. She famously told Hemingway to write what you know, a piece of advice that resonated deeply within him, shaping his later focus on concrete detail and the raw truth of lived experience. Stein's influence went far beyond simple mentorship. She provided essential financial support, opened doors to publishers, and wove together a network that allowed the lost generation to survive on modest stipends while they chased their artistic visions. But why does all of this matter to us today? It matters because the same existential void that haunted characters like Jake, Brett, and Cohn still haunts modern society, though it wears a different mask. In our digital age, we are surrounded by endless streams of content, curated lives, and the lure of instant gratification. Social media offers a constant flood of likes, shares, and comments, providing tiny dopamine hits that mask deeper, more persistent feelings of emptiness. Yet behind those glossy feeds, many of us experience chronic boredom, restlessness, and a nagging sense that something essential is missing. This phenomenon mirrors what Viktor Frankl called the existential vacuum, a state where material comfort fails to provide genuine meaning, leading individuals to seek solace in compulsive behaviors, substance use, or superficial relationships. Frankl's logotherapy proposes 3 avenues for finding meaning: creative values through work and creation, experiential values through love and beauty, and attitudinal values, the stance we take toward unavoidable suffering. Hemingway's characters embody these pathways, though often in broken or incomplete ways. Jake finds a flicker of creative value in his writing, but his inability to translate his love into action leaves him emotionally stuck. Brett seeks experiential value through passionate affairs, yet the fleeting nature of those connections prevents lasting fulfillment. Robert Cohn attempts to achieve creative value through the discipline of boxing and literature, but his lack of authentic self-knowledge undermines every effort. Even the iceberg theory itself serves as an attitudinal tool. By leaving much unsaid, Hemingway forces the reader to confront hidden depths of suffering and to assign personal meaning to the silence. Masculinity, a recurring motif in these stories, is examined through both a hard-boiled style and a fragile, post-war psyche. Hard-boiled narratives celebrate stoicism, physical toughness, and a strict code of honor that refuses to show weakness. In The Sun Also Rises, the characters wrap themselves in a veneer of bravado. They drink heavily, boast about past exploits, and engage in the rituals of bullfighting, all while internally grappling with insecurity, fear, and a profound loss of purpose. The bullfight itself becomes a powerful metaphor for masculine performance. The matador faces death with grace, the audience watches with breathless anticipation, and the crowd erupts in applause when the beast finally falls. Yet the matador's triumph is only temporary, the next fight always awaits, just as the character's small victories are fleeting and hollow. The bohemian lifestyle was an attempt to rewrite the very script of masculinity. By embracing artistic expression, rejecting the safety of conventional careers, and forming fluid social circles, these expatriates hope to construct new identities untethered from the expectations of their homeland. However, the very freedom they prized also exposed them to the abyss of meaninglessness. Without a stable framework to hold on to, the pursuit of pleasure became a hollow substitute for genuine purpose. Café conversations that once sparked brilliant inspiration could easily devolve into endless debates about nothing, reinforcing the cynical sense that everything is a joke while underlying pain persisted. Let us pause for a moment and ask ourselves, how many of us, sitting in our own living rooms, feel a little like Jake, watching the world pass by, yearning for connection, yet unable to bridge the gap? How many of us chase after our own version of Brett, seeking excitement, novelty, and validation, without ever asking why? There's a moment in every life when the trophies on the shelf, the promotions at work, the likes on a post, all of it suddenly feels hollow. Like Robert Cohn in The Sun Also Rises, we chase external validation, convinced that the next achievement will finally quiet the gnawing sense of emptiness inside. But what happens when we reach the summit and find nothing there? How many of us, in the quiet hours of the night, stare at the ceiling and wonder, is this all there is? The lost generation didn't just ask these questions, they lived them. And here's the unsettling truth, their story isn't confined to the pages of history. It's playing out right now, in the glow of our screens, in the restless scrolling for something, anything, that feels real. The difference? We have something they didn't, the language of psychology, the tools of therapy, the hard-won understanding that meaning isn't something you stumble upon. It's something you build, brick by painful brick, even when the world feels like it's crumbling around you. Take Viktor Frankl's concept of dereflection, the art of stepping outside yourself, of asking not, why do I feel so empty, but, what can I give? Imagine Jake Barnes, wounded and bitter, sitting in that Parisian café, his coffee gone cold. Instead of drowning in self-pity, what if he turned to the waiter and asked about his story? What if Brett, in all her restless glamour, had channeled her energy into lifting someone else up? That shift, from me to we, is where the light gets in. Then there's paradoxical intention, a technique so counterintuitive it borders on dark humor. Afraid of failure? Lean into it. Terrified of rejection? Picture the most spectacular, cringe-worthy flop imaginable. There's a strange power in laughing at the monster under the bed. Hemingway knew this. His characters don't flinch from pain, they stare it down, crack a dry joke, and keep moving. Sometimes, the only way out is through. So how do we take these lessons and weave them into our own lives? Start small. Carve out 10 minutes a day, no phone, no distractions, just you and a blank page. Write down what matters, the people who make your heart swell, the causes that set your soul on fire, the quiet moments that make you feel alive. Revisit those words when the noise of the world gets too loud. Create something, anything. It doesn't have to be a masterpiece. Doodle in the margins of your notebook. Burn a meal while learning to cook. Write a terrible poem. The act of making, messy, imperfect, yours, is an anchor in a world that too often feels like quicksand. And then there are the people. Not the ones who fill your social media feed with curated perfection, but the ones who see you, really see you, when you're a mess. The friends who'll sit with you in silence when words fail. The mentors who have walked the path before and aren't afraid to tell you it's hard. These relationships don't just distract from the void, they help you fill it. Lastly, stop running from the pain. The lost generation tried that, drowning their sorrows in absinthe and affairs, chasing sunrises from Paris to Pamplona, but the hollow ache always caught up. Hemingway's characters teach us that suffering isn't a detour, it's part of the road. The question isn't how do I avoid this, but how do I meet it with my head held high? Now, let's talk about how Hemingway's razor-sharp prose makes all of this feel so real. His sentences are like a boxer's jab, quick, precise, no wasted motion. When Jake describes the sunrise over the Spanish hills, he doesn't wax poetic about golden hues or the promise of a new day. He says, the sun rose and the light fell on the river. 6 words. Yet in that sparse simplicity you feel the chill of the morning air, the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, today will be different. Hemingway trusts his readers to bring their own emotions to the table. He doesn't spell it out, he leaves room for your heart to fill in the blanks. And then there's the dialogue, oh, the dialogue. When Brett tells Jake, you're a good man, Jake, but you're not a lover, the words land like a gut punch. Because we've all been there, haven't we? Standing on the wrong side of a closed door, holding a truth too heavy to say out loud. Hemingway's genius isn't in what his characters say, it's in what they don't. The silences between their words echo with everything left unsaid, the war that stole Jake's masculinity, the society that caged Brett's desires, the love that could never be. It's all there, lurking beneath the surface like the bulk of an iceberg, hidden, but impossible to ignore. Nowhere is this tension more vivid than in the bullfighting scenes. Picture Pedro Romero, the matador in his suit of lights, the crowd roaring as he dances with death. The cape swirls, the bull charges, and for a heartbeat it's just man and beast and the raw, electric fear of annihilation. But here's the twist, after the fight, Romero doesn't boast. He confesses to Jake that the real battle wasn't with the bull, it was with the terror clawing at his own ribs. The spectacle is for the crowd, the truth is the part no one sees. Sound familiar? We all have our arenas, the boardroom, the gym, the social media stage, where we perform bravery, competence, effortless cool. Behind the curtain, we're just as afraid as Romero was. The lost generation's cafés and salons were their backstage, where masks slipped and real conversations happened. They drank too much, loved too hard, and burned too bright because they were searching for something authentic in a world that felt like a sham. Today, our backstage might look different, a late-night text thread, a therapist's office, a solo hike where we finally let ourselves cry, but the hunger is the same. We're still asking the same questions they did, what's the point of work if it doesn't feed my soul? Why stay in a relationship that's a gilded cage? What does it even mean to belong somewhere? The gig economy has replaced the factory floor, and swiping right has replaced the grand romance, but the existential ache remains. The lost generation had their absinthe and their affairs, we have our side hustles and our endless self-optimization. Different eras, same desperate attempt to outrun the void. The world breaks everyone, and afterward many are strong at the broken places. These words, carved from the life of Ernest Hemingway, echo not just through the pages of his novels but across the decades, landing with quiet force in our own era of disruption and disconnection. We live in a time that mirrors the aftermath of war, not with trenches and artillery, but with digital revolutions, economic uncertainty, and a slow unraveling of the structures that once gave us identity. The 9-to-5 job, once a promise of stability, now feels like a temporary contract in a gig economy that offers flexibility but erodes the deep-rooted sense of belonging a long-term career once provided. Remote work spares us the soul-crushing commute, yet strips away the accidental collisions, the hallway banter, the coffee machine confessions, that once sparked ideas and friendships. Online communities buzz with activity, replacing the smoky intimacy of physical cafés, but too often leave us scrolling through feeds that feel alive with connection yet hollow in substance. Today's expatriate isn't fleeing post-war disillusionment by ship, they're hopping flights from Bali to Berlin with a laptop and a dream, chasing inspiration as digital nomads, only to find, beneath the tropical sunsets and cobblestone alleys, the same gnawing loneliness that haunted Hemingway's Paris. So what can we learn from those who walked through fire and emerged, scarred but speaking? From the lost generation we inherit more than literature, we inherit a blueprint for meaning in times of rupture. First, authenticity matters. Not the curated authenticity of social media profiles, but the raw, unvarnished truth of being. In Hemingway's world, the characters who dared to face themselves, even when broken, were the ones who touched something real. Jake Barnes, wounded in body and spirit, never pretends he's whole. His honesty about his limitations becomes a kind of strength, a quiet dignity in the face of irreversible loss. Lady Brett Ashley refuses to play the role of dutiful wife, even if it means drifting between lovers and cities, searching for a love she knows may never fully satisfy. And Robert Cohn, flawed and naive, still earns a sliver of respect for admitting his insecurities aloud, for naming the ache inside him instead of burying it beneath bravado. Their power lies not in perfection, but in owning their stories, messy, painful, unresolved. In our age of polished personas and highlight reels, that vulnerability is revolutionary. Second, community is not optional, it's oxygen. The lost generation didn't heal in isolation. They gathered in cafés, crowded around small tables in Montparnasse, trading stories over cheap wine and Gauloise smoke. They hosted salons where ideas collided, where art was debated with passion, where rejection letters were drowned in absinthe and new manuscripts were born from drunken arguments. These weren't just social events, they were lifelines. A fragile safety net woven from shared exile, mutual recognition, and the unspoken understanding that none of them quite fit anymore. In our hyper-connected world, where we can message someone on another continent in an instant yet feel unseen by the person sitting beside us, the lesson is urgent. Real community doesn't emerge from algorithms. It grows in book clubs where voices rise and fall over dog-eared pages, in art collectives where paint splatters on floors and egos are left at the door, in local workshops where hands shape clay or wood while conversations deepen over time. These spaces matter because they demand presence, eyes meeting, silences shared, laughter echoing off walls. They remind us we are not alone in our confusion, our grief, our search. Third, meaning is not a fixed point we arrive at, like a destination on a map. It is not something we unlock after enough success, wealth, or self-help books. Meaning is a verb, a practice, a daily choice to engage, to create, to show up, even when the world feels meaningless. After the Great War, everything had changed. The old rules no longer applied. Faith in progress, in institutions, in God Himself, had been shattered by the industrialized slaughter of millions. The lost generation had to rebuild meaning from scratch, piece by fragile piece. Today, we face our own upheavals, technological acceleration that outpaces our ability to adapt, climate anxiety that looms like a storm on the horizon, economies that reward agility over loyalty. Circumstances shift beneath our feet, and clinging to outdated scripts only deepens the void. Meaning, then, must be dynamic. It requires courage to reassess, to let go of identities that no longer serve us, to ask again and again, who am I now? What matters now? How do I respond? Imagine, for a moment, stepping into the shoes of one of Hemingway's characters. You're seated at a small, wobbly table in a dimly lit café, the kind where light pools in golden circles and shadows stretch long across cracked tile floors. A half-finished manuscript lies before you, pages stained with coffee rings and crossed-out lines. Your fingers wrap around a glass of cheap red wine, its surface catching the flicker of a candle. Outside, Paris breathes, taxis honk, couples bicker in rapid French, strangers laugh under street lamps. Inside, your mind churns. A relationship has ended. A career path has collapsed. Or perhaps an old grief, long buried, has resurfaced like a corpse from a riverbed, impossible to ignore. You could numb it all, order another drink, lose yourself in the blur of alcohol and noise. Instead, you pick up your pen. You look up. You observe, the woman by the window tracing patterns in condensation, the man muttering to himself in the corner, the way rain streaks the glass like tears. Then, slowly, you write one sentence. Just one. Honest. Simple. True. I am afraid. She never loved me. I don't know who I am anymore. That sentence, brief as it is, carries the weight of your entire experience. It doesn't solve anything, but it acknowledges, names the pain, and transforms private suffering into something universal, something another person might read years later and say, yes, that's how I feel too. This is the alchemy Hemingway mastered. Not in grand declarations, but in the precision of understatement. His iceberg theory, named by his friend Edmund Wilson, wasn't just a writing technique, it was a worldview. He believed that only a fraction of the story should appear on the surface, like the tip of an iceberg above water. The rest, the mass, the depth, the true emotional weight, must remain submerged, implied through silence, gesture, restraint. A character says, "I'm fine," but the way he grips his glass tells another story. Two people sit across from each other, saying nothing, and the emptiness between them speaks louder than any argument. This style emerged from necessity. How do you articulate the trauma of war when language fails? How do you describe the hollowness inside when no word feels big enough? The answer was to stop trying to say it all, to trust the reader to feel what wasn't said, to let absence speak. That principle mirrored the lived reality of the lost generation. Men returned from the front physically intact but emotionally shattered, carrying wounds no doctor could see. They sat in cafés, drank too much, laughed too loudly, and avoided the subject of the war entirely. The silence wasn't emptiness, it was fullness, overflowing with memories too terrible to voice. The collective silence became the atmosphere of an era, thick in the air of bars, hotel rooms, and late-night conversations that circled the truth without ever touching it. The unsaid was everywhere, and yet, in that space between words, meaning began to form, not in speeches or manifestos, but in glances, in music, in the act of showing up night after night to sit with others who also couldn't sleep. Now picture it, spring of 1922. Rain falls softly on the streets of Paris, turning cobblestones into mirrors that reflect gas lamps and passing figures wrapped in coats. The city smells of wet earth, cigarette smoke, and the faint bitterness of espresso. Inside Café de Flore, a young Ernest Hemingway sits near the back, lean and alert, his bronze hair slightly tousled, a notebook open on the table. He's not famous yet. Not the legend. Just another expatriate, another refugee from a world that made no sense. But already, he's shaping a new language, one stripped of ornament, built on clarity and tension, where every word earns its place. He watches people, listens, absorbs. In that act of observation he begins to build something lasting, not just stories, but a way of seeing, a way of enduring. If you followed this thread, from the smoke-filled cafés of 1920s Paris to the glowing rectangles we carry in our pockets, you've already taken a step toward closing the existential gap that threatens to widen in our lives. We cannot eliminate discomfort. No one walks through life unscathed. Pain is inevitable. Loss is certain. But the response is ours to choose. We can let suffering define us, trap us, drown us. Or we can, like Hemingway and his generation, use it as raw material. Viktor Frankl put it simply, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Meaning isn't found. It's made. Crafted. Chosen. So take these ideas. Let them settle. Let them stir. Maybe you'll write a paragraph each day, not for an audience but for yourself, a record of what you're feeling, thinking, surviving. Maybe you'll join a local art class, not to become great, but to be around others who are trying, failing, trying again. Or maybe you'll simply sit in a park, watch leaves tremble in the wind, listen to children shout and dogs bark, and let the silence speak louder than any curated soundtrack ever could. Because meaning isn't loud. It's quiet. It builds slowly, brick by brick, word by word, action by action. The lost generation showed us both the danger of drifting, of numbing the pain with drink, movement, distraction, and the beauty that emerges when we stop running and start building. When we write the honest sentence. When we show up at the table. When we dare to say, I am broken. And still, I am here. Europe and America after the war were landscapes of restless souls searching for meaning amid ruins. Jake Barnes, the stoic protagonist of The Sun Also Rises, embodies this silent suffering. His war injury, an emasculating wound that leaves him impotent, serves as both a literal and metaphorical loss of traditional masculine identity. In a world that prized virility and conquest, Jake's impotence forces him into a new kind of masculinity, one defined by restraint, observation, and an almost zen acceptance of his limitations. He watches the bullfights in Pamplona not as a spectator of spectacle but as a witness to ritualized violence that mirrors his own internal battle. Each thrust of the Matador's sword becomes a reminder of wounds that never heal, and each cheer from the crowd a hollow echo of a society that refuses to acknowledge the cost of its own bravado. Lady Brett Ashley, meanwhile, shatters every expectation of femininity held by her male counterparts. She is at once the object of desire and the catalyst for destruction, moving through the narrative like a gust of wind that rattles the fragile structures of the men around her. Brett's freedom, her ability to love without commitment, to travel without restraint, to drink without shame, represents the bohemian ideal that many in the expatriate circle coveted. Yet her very freedom also exposes the fragility of the male ego in a post-war world. When Robert Cohn, the affluent Jewish writer who idolizes Brett, attempts to assert his own version of masculinity through aggression and jealousy, he reveals how the veneer of confidence can crumble under the pressure of unrequited love and cultural alienation. Cohn's character is a study in the paradox of belonging and exclusion. Though he possesses wealth and education, his Jewish heritage makes him an outsider in the predominantly Protestant, Anglo-American enclave of expatriates. His obsession with Brett becomes a desperate attempt to assimilate, to prove his worth through the acquisition of a woman who epitomizes the liberated modern woman. Yet his failure underscores a broader truth: the post-war disillusionment was not merely a reaction to battlefield horrors, but also a response to the collapse of pre-war social hierarchies. The old markers of status, bloodline, religion, military rank, no longer guaranteed acceptance. In their place rose a new currency: authenticity, artistic merit, and the willingness to confront existential emptiness head-on. Gertrude Stein, the avant-garde poet and salon host, offered a different kind of refuge. Her Parisian townhouse on 27 Rue de Fleuris became a sanctuary where writers, painters, and musicians could experiment without fear of commercial judgment. Stein's repetitive, fragmented prose, "Rose is a rose is a rose," mirrored the fractured consciousness of a generation trying to reassemble its identity from splintered memories. By encouraging the likes of Picasso, Matisse, and Hemingway to make it new, she fostered an environment where the boundaries between literature and visual art blurred, giving rise to a synesthetic aesthetic that still influences contemporary storytelling. The hard-boiled style that emerged from these circles was not simply a literary fad, it was a coping mechanism. Its terse sentences, clipped dialogue, and stark descriptions functioned as a form of emotional armor. In the same way a soldier might strip away unnecessary gear before entering combat, these writers stripped their prose of ornamental excess, leaving only the essentials that could bear the weight of their experiences. The result was a language that could convey grief, longing, and absurdity without melodrama, a language that resonated with readers navigating the bleak corridors of post-war existence. Consider the scene in A Movable Feast where Hemingway describes a rainy night in Saint-Germain-des-Prés. He writes, "The rain fell in sheets, and the streetlights turned the puddles into mirrors." The simplicity of the image belies a deeper reflection on self-perception. The city reflects the writer's own fragmented self, each ripple a distortion of the truth he seeks. This moment captures the essence of the iceberg theory: only the surface is visible, while the turbulent currents below remain unseen, pulling the observer inexorably toward an unknown depth. Masculinity, in this context, becomes a fluid construct rather than a rigid archetype. The war had rendered the traditional soldier-hero obsolete, instead, the new hero was the man who could endure silence, who could sit alone in a cafe and listen to the hum of conversation without needing to dominate it. This shift is evident in Hemingway's later works, such as For Whom the Bell Tolls, where protagonists are simultaneously vulnerable and resolute. Robert Jordan, the American dynamiter fighting in the Spanish Civil War, is haunted by the knowledge that his actions will never be fully understood or remembered. Yet his courage lies not in grand gestures but in the quiet acceptance of his own mortality, recognizing that both he and the cause he fought for are fleeting. He finally comes to terms with his own mortality, accepting that both he and the cause he fought for are fleeting. That quiet surrender sets the stage for everything that follows. After the guns fell silent, a heavy sense of disillusionment settled over the survivors, slowly drifting into the literary world like fog rolling off the river. Thinkers such as Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus walked parallel paths, even if they never sat down for drinks with Ernest Hemingway himself. They all felt the same strange weight, that deep awareness of the absurdity of life which became the heartbeat of the lost generation. Their shared idea was simple yet devastating: humans desperately crave purpose, but the universe answers back with nothing but cold, indifferent silence. You can feel that exact tension pulsing through every page of The Sun Also Rises. When the novel closes, leaving us with that hesitant exchange of yes and no between Jake and Brett, we are left hanging in a fragile middle ground. Meaning dangles right in front of us, offered one moment and pulled away the next. The way these expatriates lived their daily lives was a direct pushback against the greed and materialism that had dragged entire nations into slaughter. They chose cramped rooms over grand estates, sharing bottles of cheap red wine and breaking apart stale loaves of bread while reading poetry aloud until the early hours. It was a vibrant alternative movement that valued the act of making art far above the pursuit of money. Yet, if you look closely, you see the cracks in the foundation. Many of those who loudly rejected conventional wealth quietly depended on checks from wealthy patrons or European nobility just to keep the lights on. That quiet contradiction added a sharp layer of irony to their whole story, proving that true freedom is rarely as clean as it looks on paper. Decades later, when the smoke cleared from the battlefields of Europe and the Pacific, that old ache returned wearing a different face. Soldiers coming home faced a society that felt strangely hollow, even more empty than the trenches they had survived. A deep void opened inside people as advertising campaigns promised that buying new things would somehow heal invisible wounds. Consumer culture tried to sell fulfillment, but it could never touch the lingering trauma etched into the minds of a generation. Authors like Norman Mailer and Jack Kerouac inherited the minimalist style pioneered by Hemingway and used it to navigate this fresh emptiness. Their books swing wildly between brutal honesty and dreamlike prose, trying to name something that refused to be named. If you read On the Road by Kerouac today, you can trace a clear line straight back to The Sun Also Rises. Both stories follow restless travelers wandering across maps marked by recent violence. Hemingway sent his characters drifting through dimly lit Paris cafés and dusty Spanish arenas, while Kerouac put his wanderers behind the wheel, chasing ghosts along endless American highways. One traded aristocratic drawing rooms for roadside diners and glowing jukeboxes, but the pulse underneath stayed exactly the same, a desperate, beautiful hunger to patch up the holes torn open by conflict, by grief, and by the relentless march of time. That same storytelling instinct, often called the iceberg theory, still shapes how we watch movies and television today. Directors like Christopher Nolan and Denis Villeneuve deliberately hold back information, trusting audiences to piece together hidden motives from a glance or a shadow. It is a direct translation of Hemingway's core belief that real communication happens in the quiet moments, in hearing what is deliberately left unsaid. Look at a show like Mad Men, where Don Draper wears a flawless suit and a perfect smile while carrying a massive, echoing emptiness inside him. He mirrors Jake Barnes perfectly, maintaining a stiff upper lip while chaos brews beneath the surface. These modern stories prove that the lessons learned in the cigarette-stained parlors of 1920s Paris never really faded. They remind us that the human experience, caught forever between suffering and the search for reason, does not change with the times. Now bring that lens forward to our own era and watch how screens alter the way we handle these ancient struggles. Our phones feed us an endless stream of polished snapshots, building a shiny new surface that completely masks what lies underneath. Snapping a filtered picture of a latte on a cobblestone street might visually echo the crisp descriptions written by Hemingway regarding wet pavement, but the motive has shifted entirely. Instead of uncovering reality, we are busy manufacturing a fantasy. The real test for modern storytellers, and honestly for anyone craving something genuine, is learning how to crack through that glossy digital shell. We need words that carry the heavy, unspoken weight of actual lived experience, just like the masters did. There is a straightforward way to practice this yourself, borrowing directly from that iceberg mindset. Pick a completely ordinary moment, perhaps a crowded subway car, a noisy street market, or a single wooden bench under a tree. Capture it in exactly 3 sentences. Lock onto physical sensations, the metallic screech of brakes, the sharp smell of ripe citrus, the steady drumbeat of shoes on concrete. Deliberately refuse to explain how anyone feels. Once you step back, notice which emotions rise up on their own. This simple drill teaches your brain to trust that significance will bubble up naturally, without needing to force it into the light. Adopting that unbound artistic attitude does not mean throwing away your job or ignoring your duties. It simply means carving out small sanctuaries, either in your room or in your head, where imagination can stretch its legs without being measured by spreadsheets or deadlines. Find a neighborhood writing group, sit in the back row of a local poetry night, or just block out an hour to watch strangers pass by a corner shop and scribble fragments of their conversations. By making that space, you honor the tradition. This brings us to the profound connection of the lost generation, a group of souls who found a strange, quiet solace in communal observation and the act of sharing their own vulnerability. The very notion of masculinity, as reframed by Hemingway and his peers, invites each of us to reconsider what strength actually looks like in our modern era. Perhaps true strength does not lie in domination or an iron will, but rather in the raw willingness to confront one's own brokenness. It is the courage to admit that the world has indeed broken everyone, and to allow those jagged fractures to become the very sites where growth begins. This perspective mirrors contemporary discussions around mental health, where we increasingly recognize that vulnerability is not a weakness, but a cornerstone of true resilience. Then we have the tragic arc of Robert Cohn, which serves as a haunting cautionary tale. His story warns us about the dangers of conflating external validation with internal worth. Cohn spent his life in a relentless pursuit of Brett, driven by a desperate desire to prove himself to the world, but this path only led him toward isolation and eventual self-destruction. For the modern reader, Cohn's fate stands as a warning: do not allow external achievements, whether career milestones, the dopamine hit of social media likes, or romantic conquests, to define personal value. Instead, shift focus inward, toward intrinsic satisfaction derived from honest self-expression and the cultivation of meaningful connections. Gertrude Stein provides another layer to this journey. Her experimental syntax might seem baffling at first glance, but it serves as a powerful reminder that language itself can be a playground for redefining reality. By intentionally breaking conventional grammatical rules, Stein encouraged her peers to think far beyond linear narratives. She opened the doors to the stream of consciousness techniques later employed by giants like James Joyce and Virginia Woolf. Today's writers can adopt a similar mindset, experimenting with form through fragmented poetry, nonlinear storytelling, or multimedia integration to capture the sheer complexity of contemporary life. As we trace the lineage from Hemingway's early short stories to the sprawling epics of modern cinema, one common thread persists: the eternal quest to articulate the ineffable. Whether it is the terrifying roar of artillery at the Somme, the casual clink of glasses in a dim Parisian bar, or the muted, electric hum of a city's nightscape, each sound carries an echo of human longing. By listening closely, and by allowing the silence between the words to speak, we honor the tradition of those who came before us. We ensure that the iceberg beneath our narratives remains ever present, guiding future generations toward a deeper understanding of the human condition. So, as you close this episode and perhaps turn off the lights, take a moment to look inward. Notice the small, unnoticed details that surround you right now. Observe the way steam curls slowly from your coffee, the faint ticking of a distant clock, the steady rhythm of your own breath. Let those simple observations become the tip of your own iceberg, supporting a vast, submerged world of thoughts, memories, and possibilities just waiting to be explored. In the spirit of the lost generation, may you find courage in your broken places, and may your pen, or your keyboard, always be ready to capture the truth that lies just below the surface.